While no one country actually officially announced sending F-16 jets to Ukraine yet, that is basically just a formality at this point. Various countries have announced readiness to send planes, and they've announced they will train Ukrainian crews. After MiG-29s were sent by Poland and Slovakia earlier this year, F-16s are not seen as that much of an escalation anymore. But what sort of F-16 numbers would Ukraine ultimately be operating? What factors limit their future F-16 fleet? This video will try to explain why 100 F-16s at once is not likely for Ukraine. Hey, before we start, we'd like to introduce you to an indie strategy gem of a game that we found. Attack at Dawn, North Africa is a World War II strategy game set in the deserts of North Africa. The game has a large map covering a distance of 2,000 kilometers, from Benghazi in Libya to the Suez Canal in Egypt. You can play the game in real-time or turn-based mode, and you can switch between the modes on the fly to choose your game speed and style. Campaign history has been researched in depth to make the game accurate but also exciting to play. The game is easy to learn but hard to master. It has a polished, adaptable interface and the ability to zoom out and see the entire battlefield. So take command of the Desert Army and change the course of history by following my link in the video description below. Back to the F-16. The US did a research program this February and March assessing a few Ukrainian pilots. It concluded 4 months might be enough for conversion and proficiency at just visual range employment of air-to-air missiles. Additional training would be needed for other mission types, like long-range air combat or ground strikes, so Ukraine might need a longer time to get better trained pilots. Let's hear what another source says. Warzone news portal cited an unnamed F-16 instructor, saying that a pilot who already flew 500 hours in other Western fighters, meaning he has a few years of experience but has not yet flown an F-16, needs roughly 2.5 months to convert to F-16 and learn enough to do both air-to-air and air-to-ground combat. Mind you, going from an F-15 to F-16, where the entire syllabus and weapons usage is similar, is less demanding than going from a Soviet-era MiG-29 to an F-16. The same instructor said that for those pilots to be really effective in combat, 6 to 12 months would be needed, rather than just a couple of months. Way back in summer of 2022, Colonel Yuri Ignat, spokesman of Ukraine's Air Force Command, said Ukraine had at least 30 pilots who speak enough English to train on F-16, with additional maintenance crews to be trained as well. Ignat then said 6 months is needed to retrain those experienced pilots. A much more recent estimate was given by a British government spokesperson, according to the foreign policy media outlet, where they said approximately 20 Ukrainian pilots will enter initial training. But as far as length of training goes, taking those 3 assessments from 3 different sources, 6 months seems like a plausible average figure needed to retrain a pilot using Soviet jets to F-16. Though to be good at it, as much as 12 months might be needed. Claims on the number of pilots available are also telling. It used to be 30, but it fell to 20. Over the course of war, a training of new pilots can take a back seat to actually utilizing available pilots for combat. That's, for example, what made the German or Japanese pilot cadre during World War II poor as the war went on. It means Ukraine doesn't really have a big pool of pilots to be sent for conversion training, and that pool may shrink further unless extra investment in fresh, inexperienced pilots or non-Ukrainian pilots is made. More than 1 pilot is needed per every jet, especially when in war and jets are flown frequently. So 20-something pilots might realistically be enough for some 15 or so F-16s. Additional pilots are of course possible. If one went and started training civilians with no flying experience, some 18 months might be required before they even step into an F-16. 12 months at the very least, with a very compressed syllabus due to war urgency. But then one needs to add actual fighter training on top of those. Ultimately, it's unlikely a brand new pilot could be made effective in less than 2 years. Another source of pilots could be, of course, non-Ukrainian nationals. Ex-military pilots with actual experience on F-16s. knowing that some 3,000 US nationals fought for Ukraine as army men, as some media articles from 2022 claimed. A similar ratio of volunteers for ex-Air Force might lead to 5 or so ex-F-16 pilots volunteering. Now, those numbers might be beefed up a little if we're talking about actual contracts with ample money paid to prospective ex-Western Air Force pilots. Pilots are one bottleneck, sure, but there are others, like maintenance crews. A small 12-plane squadron of F-16s usually needs some 300 ground personnel to service them when deployed. While that doesn't need to scale up linearly, the example is given for a unit operating from a single base. Ukraine is very likely unable to operate more than several planes from one spot. Rather, it is dispersing its existing fighter jets all over the country, and will do so with F-16s as well, using not only various airports and runways, but straight patches of road as well. Such dispersed usage will likely require more ground crews per each F-16. F-16s aren't really designed to be used from roads and are more sensitive to debris found on the road compared to Soviet planes, which means extra crews will be needed to keep those roads clean before every redeployment. All those people need to be trained as well, though it's likely ground crew training can be faster. A US Government Accountability Office report said that a US Air Force maintainer needs between 1 and 6 months of training to become an apprentice, depending on their job. Further 12 months of on-job experience are then required before they can become fully qualified. So in practice, 6 to 12 months might be needed before newly taught maintainers could return to Ukraine and service the F-16s. Having some guidance from contract-based personnel on site might help there, but that might be a risky political decision if they're Western-sourced ex-Air Force personnel. Those timelines roughly match the ones for pilots, and they also match a timeline given by a senior Central European defense official, as per Politico report. The official said it's realistic that Ukraine will get F-16s by this fall. Using the 6+ months that we established earlier, that might mean November or December deliveries, before first combat missions are attempted around the very end of the year. These are all based on June as being the starting date. Keep in mind that training may have already started in some manner. Storm Shadow missiles have, for example, been officially disclosed only after Ukraine already integrated them onto their planes. Mind you, the number of F-16s initially given to Ukraine is not going to be big, not only because there might be only 20 to 30 pilots available in the short term, but also because there might not be that many planes available. The US wording on F-16s to Ukraine is a bit vague. It may be the US is seeking to facilitate other countries' F-16s transferred to Ukraine, rather than sending F-16s from its own stocks. While that may change over time, it may be just like with tanks that the US will be waiting for European countries to kickstart it all. Belgium said they don't have actual F-16s to spare. The Netherlands has around 18 surplus airframes that could be refurbished and sent. Denmark could likely spare several or a dozen old airframes, as well as Norway. Furthermore, Norway sold 32 second-hand F-16s to Romania fairly recently. A few of those could be arranged to be transferred to Ukraine instead. Portugal is also a possible source for a few airframes. All in all, perhaps 24 airframes might be scraped up by December. Netherlands is planning to retire another 24 F-16s sometime next year, after their Air Force fully converts to F-35 jets. That would likely mean 24 more F-16s for Ukraine during 2024. Greece might be persuaded to give a few airframes, but they might say they need their big fleet. If anything, Greece would be a better candidate to give their 24 Mirage 2000s, which are slated for near-future retirement as their squadron converts to Rafale fighters. France might give some of their own old Mirage 2000s if that happens, but that's another topic. But Ukraine is mostly limited by the number of available experienced pilots. So initially, even if the West showered Ukraine with 100 F-16s, there would be no one to service and fly so many planes at once. Then again, when planes get shut down or crash, there's a decent likelihood the pilot will eject and live to fly another jet. Ukraine's own defense officials called for a number closer to 24 F-16s initially. Then, as training a brand new pilot from scratch is a long process, it's unlikely Ukraine will get several dozen jets operational before mid-2025. But even then, numbers are not likely to rise up quickly. New pilots lack experience and may crash or get shot down more often. NATO's F-16 pilot training capacities aren't available for another added 100 pilots at once. The US Air Force is, for example, adding 1,500 pilots per year, but even that's over 200 pilots short for their needs. And that figure covers all pilot positions for their 5,500 planes, not just the 900 F-16s they operate. The US might squeeze in a dozen or so trained pilots without additional instructors, so that bottleneck too is something that may take time to build up. So it is only sometime in 2026 and after that more and more Ukrainian pilots might actually be arriving per year. Such very long-term investments might be hard to justify in this situation, when no one knows how long the war might last. At the same time, some F-16s and their pilots will be lost during the war each year. F-16s are a step up from Soviet planes, but they're not invincible. However, they will be yet another arrow in Ukraine's quiver against Russia.